Welcome to the Core Concepts interactive video. This video will introduce you to a few core concepts and definitions for this training series. Understanding these concepts will ensure a shared vocabulary and foundation from which we can examine complex issues and develop new skills. We are the National Crime Victim Law Institute. When we talk about victims' rights, we often point to the apostrophe as the most important part of this phrase. And we'll get into that later. But to start off, we want to let you know that the words matter too. Over the past 5 decades, there has been a cascade of state constitutional amendments and federal and state statutes that afford quote-unquote victims participatory rights in the criminal and military justice systems. These legal rights are only available to people who fit the relevant jurisdiction's definition of quote-unquote victim. So when we use the word victim, we are using it here as a legal term that defines an individual who is an independent participant in the criminal case under these laws. This status is significant because a victim can exercise certain participatory rights unavailable to the general public. For example, the Federal Crime Victims' Rights Act defines the term crime victim as the person against whom the state offense is committed, or if that person is killed or incapacitated, that person's family member or other lawful representative. A few states define the term victim broadly to include people harmed by any criminal offense. For example, any prohibited conduct that is punishable by fines or imprisonment or both. Some jurisdictions define victim to include persons harmed by any misdemeanor or felony, like in California, where victim means a person against whom a crime has been committed, and crime means an act committed in this state which, if committed by a competent adult, would constitute a misdemeanor or felony. Some jurisdictions limit victim status to persons who are harmed only by certain types of offenses, such as Arkansas's Victims' Rights Statute, that says the term victim refers to a victim of a sex offense or an offense against a victim who is a minor and a victim of any violent crime. And violent crime means any felony which resulted in physical injury to the victim, any felony involving the use of a deadly weapon, terroristic threatening in the first degree, and stalking. When the victim is a minor or is incapacitated, incompetent, or deceased, crime victims' rights laws generally allow courts to recognize other persons as legal victims who can exercise rights either in addition to or on behalf of that direct victim. When determining whether a person is a victim for crime victims' rights purposes, victims' attorneys and advocates must carefully analyze the definition of victim as it is written in the jurisdiction's constitutional amendment, Victims' Rights Statute, or court rules. Outside of the legal system, many individuals prefer the term survivor to the word victim. Within the legal framework, this term can also carry a separate legal meaning. For instance, the Survivors' Bill of Rights Act of 2016 guarantees sexual assault survivors specific rights in addition to the rights listed in the Crime Victims' Rights Act, such as the right not to be prevented from or charged for receiving a medical forensic examination. The legal definition of the term survivor may determine whether certain rights and remedies extend to individuals who qualify under that definition. During this training, we are also going to discuss different categories of advocates, as well as the characteristics and obligations specific to each of their roles. System-based advocates are generally employed by prosecutors or district attorneys' offices, law enforcement agencies, parole and probation offices, post-conviction and appellate programs. They follow the mission of their agency and generally serve populations based on geography or jurisdiction. System-based advocates tend to serve victims while a case is moving through the system. which means their focus lays outside of prevention. Their services aim to promote access to and participation in the system. Their victim services are confidential to an extent, but they do not have privilege. We will dig into confidentiality and privilege during a future session, but here are their short definitions. Community-based advocates often work for crisis hotlines, rape crisis centers, domestic violence shelters, culturally specific support programs, homicide support groups, campus programs, immigration and refugee organizations, legal service programs, and other nonprofit organizations. Their organizations set their own missions, and they generally identify and select their own populations to serve based on a factor such as gender, type of crime, culture, or geography. Community-based advocates often serve victims regardless of whether there is a case moving through a legal system. Their victim services are confidential and, in some jurisdictions, privileged. But we will take a closer look at that later. Both types of advocates can offer similar emotional support, provide information and education, assist with safety planning and problem solving, offer access to services and resources, and support victim empowerment. Compliance and enforcement are very different, but they are both important. One cannot be effective without the other. Compliance is the term we use for putting efforts in place that reduce the system's failures to afford victims their rights. One example of this is victim notification through automated systems such as VINE, which stands for Victim Information Notification Every Day. VINE is an attempt to use technology to make sure that the notice systems are obligated to provide to victims is timely given. If compliance is upheld by the system, everyone benefits because the system is working to afford victims' rights the way it should. Enforcement is when an individual victim wants to assert their personal voice in the system. Sometimes enforcement is necessary because victims' rights were not complied with. Other times, enforcement is necessary simply because the victim wants to be an active participant in the system in a legally recognized way. Enforcement is a way of saying, something needs to be done about this now. It occurs when the courts step in to ensure that victims' rights are honored. This usually means motion practice in the courts or litigation. Victims' rights enforcement litigation generally seeks two types of remedies. Most simply stated, these remedies are stop remedies, which means stop doing whatever you are doing before you violate a victim's rights, and do-over remedies, which means do a proceeding over again if you have already violated a victim's rights. Knowing who is a victim so they can ask for their rights, demanding that systems comply with those rights, and seeking enforcement of those rights are all part of the cycle to make sure that rights are more than just words on paper. Let's wrap up with some key takeaways for these core concepts. Specific definitions dictate who can assert and seek enforcement of victims' rights. Also, different types of advocates have unique responsibilities and limitations, but they each play a critical role in providing holistic support to crime victims. And finally, professionals like you can make sure that victims' rights have meaning by staying mindful and identifying victims' rights issues in your clients' interactions with the justice system.